There's a specific kind of silence that settles over a forest at 0400. Not absence of sound. Nature is never truly quiet, but a suspension, a held breath before dawn. The Douglas firs stand like sentries in the pre-light, their bark dark with moisture. Somewhere in the distance, a varied thrush calls once, twice, then stops. The world waits. My name is Dr. Elena Voss. For 7 years, I worked as a wildlife pattern analyst for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, specializing in unidentified territorial behaviors in the Pacific Northwest. That's the official designation. The unofficial truth is simpler. I tracked things that weren't supposed to exist. I had documented 247 separate incidents across Washington, Oregon, and Northern California, footprints that defied known mammalian anatomy, tree structures that showed signs of tool use and intentional design, vocalizations recorded on remote audio sensors that matched no species in any database. I had built a career on patterns, on data that whispered instead of shouted, on evidence that accumulated grain by grain until the truth became undeniable. But nothing in 7 years of field analysis prepared me for the night I heard one speak, not vocalize, not communicate through gesture or sound, speak, and nothing prepared me for what I did with that knowledge. The Olympic Peninsula Field Station sat 40 miles from the nearest town, accessible only by logging roads that turned to mud 6 months of the year. It was perfect for my work, remote enough to avoid casual interference. Positioned at the intersection of 3 major territorial zones I'd been monitoring since 2018. The station itself was modest, a weathered cabin with solar panels, an equipment shed, and enough satellite bandwidth to transmit data back to the regional office in Portland. I spent 3 weeks out of every month there, alone except for the occasional visit from park rangers or the supply drops every 10 days. Some people found the isolation oppressive. I found it clarifying. My work followed the established protocol. Deploy remote sensors across a 200-square-mile monitoring zone, collect data, motion-activated cameras, audio recorders, ground pressure sensors, even bark analysis from marked trees. Compile, cross-reference, look for patterns that indicated non-random behavior. In 7 years, I had documented enough to fill 3 doctoral dissertations that would never be published. The scientific community wasn't ready. Maybe they never would be. But the data didn't care about readiness. It simply accumulated, patient and irrefutable. Territory 7. North had shown consistent activity for 18 months. Large bipedal tracks appearing in predictable seasonal patterns. Tree breaks at heights exceeding 8 feet, arranged in configurations that suggested communication or territorial marking. And vocalizations. Low-frequency calls recorded at dawn and dusk, complex enough to show dialectical variation. I had designated the primary subject as individual November 7, estimated height 7'8", based on stride length and reach marks. Estimated weight 380, 420 pounds based on ground compression analysis. Behavioral profile, cautious, methodologically consistent, displaying clear territorial awareness and active camera avoidance. In 18 months, I had never seen it. That's the reality of cryptozoological fieldwork that no one tells you. Hundreds of hours, thousands of data points, and almost no direct observation. You track ghosts through the evidence they leave behind, building portraits of creatures that seem to understand exactly how to remain invisible. But individual November 7 made a mistake. It happened 3 weeks into my October rotation. I was reviewing audio data from Sensor Station 14, a remote recorder positioned near a creek bed that showed regular activity. The recordings were routine at first. Water sounds, bird calls, the rustle of wind through western hemlock. Then, at 04:47:23, something else. I isolated the segment and ran it through analysis software. Frequency range, 80-450 Hz, well within hominid vocal capacity. Duration, 3 seconds. Pattern, structured, non-random, showing clear articulation breaks. I played it back at half speed. The sound was definitely vocalization, but it had phonemic structure. Discrete sound units arranged in sequence, with tonal variation that suggested meaning beyond simple emotional expression. This wasn't just communication. This was language. I sat in the cabin's equipment room, headphones pressed to my ears, playing those 6.3 seconds over and over, 17 times, 23 times, trying to convince myself I was wrong. On the 41st playback, I heard something else buried in the background noise. A response, quieter, higher-pitched, lasting only 2.1 seconds. Two voices. I pulled up the motion sensor data from the same timestamp. Camera 14B had triggered 4 times in the preceding minutes, but the IR illumination had been insufficient, just dark shapes moving through frame, too blurred for identification. But the ground pressure sensors told a clearer story. 2 distinct signature patterns, one consistent with November 7's known profile, the other smaller, approximately 4'6", tall, 110, 130 pounds. November 7 wasn't alone anymore. I spent the rest of that night recalibrating my monitoring grid, repositioning cameras, increasing sensor sensitivity. If there were 2 individuals in Territory 7 North, everything about my behavioral models needed updating. But underneath the scientific protocol, something else was forming. A question I hadn't allowed myself to ask in 7 years of careful, documented research. If they could speak, what were they saying to each other? And if I learned the answer, what would I be obligated to do with it? That's the reality of cryptozoological fieldwork that no one tells you. Hundreds of hours, thousands of data points, and almost no direct observation. You track ghosts through the evidence they leave behind, building portraits of creatures that seem to understand exactly how to remain invisible. But individual November 7 made a mistake. It happened 3 weeks into my October rotation. I was reviewing audio data from Sensor Station 14, a remote recorder positioned near a creek bed that showed regular activity. The recordings were routine at first. Water sounds, bird calls, the rustle of wind through western hemlock. Then at 04:47:23 something else. I isolated the segment and ran it through Analyst software. Frequency range, 80–450 Hz, well within hominid vocal capacity. Duration, 6.3 seconds. Pattern, structured, non-random, showing clear articulation breaks. I played it back at half speed. The sound was definitely vocalization, but it had phonemic structure. Discrete sound units arranged in sequence, with tonal variation that suggested meaning beyond simple emotional expression. This wasn't just communication. This was language. I sat in the cabin's equipment room, headphones pressed to my ears, playing those 6.3 seconds over and over, 17 times, 23 times, trying to convince myself I was wrong. On the 41st playback, I heard something else buried in the background noise. A response, quieter, higher-pitched, lasting only 2.1 seconds. 2 voices. I pulled up the motion sensor data from the same timestamp. Camera 14B had triggered 4 times in the preceding minutes, but the IR illumination had been insufficient. Just dark shapes moving through frame, too blurred for identification. But the ground pressure sensors told a clearer story. 2 distinct signature patterns, one consistent with November 7's known profile, the other smaller, approximately 4'6" tall, 110, 130 pounds. November 7 wasn't alone anymore. I spent the rest of that night recalibrating my monitoring grid, repositioning cameras, increasing sensor sensitivity. If there were 2 individuals in Territory 7 North, everything about my behavioral models needed updating. But underneath the scientific protocol, something else was forming. A question I hadn't allowed myself to ask in 7 years of careful, documented research. If they could speak, what were they saying to each other? And if I learned the answer, what would I be obligated to do with it? Development 2, 600 words. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source, linguistic analysis software. I had a colleague at the University of Washington, Dr. James Okonkwo, a computational linguist who specialized in pattern recognition in non-human communication systems. He'd done groundbreaking work on whale songs and primate vocalizations, always looking for the boundary between instinctive communication and actual language. I sent him the audio files without context, just raw data with a vague cover story about unidentified wildlife vocalizations in Olympic National Park. His response came back in 48 hours. "Where the hell did you get this?" We met in Seattle, in a coffee shop anonymous enough for deniability. James arrived with his laptop and the careful expression of someone carrying information that might be career-ending. "Elena," he said, opening his analysis results. "These vocalizations show phonological consistency, not just random sounds, actual systematic sound patterns. Look." He pulled up a spectrogram. "These markers indicate intentional pitch modulation. And here, these gaps, those are syntactic boundaries, pauses that serve grammatical function. What are you saying?" "I'm saying this is language, structured, rule-based communication. Whatever made these sounds wasn't just expressing emotion or signaling danger. It was speaking. He looked up, his eyes intense behind wire-frame glasses. What species are we dealing with? I took a long moment before answering. Unclassified. Elena, I can't tell you more than that. Not yet. But I need to know. If I acquired more samples, could you work toward translation? Translation requires context, grammar patterns, consistent vocabulary, ideally observational data linking sounds to actions or objects. He paused. But theoretically, yes. If we had enough data points, machine learning could start identifying semantic patterns. How much data? Conservatively, 40 to 50 hours of varied vocalizations. And that's just for basic pattern recognition. I had been recording sounds in Territory 7 North for 18 months. I had hundreds of audio files, most dismissed as environmental noise or cataloged as unidentified vocalizations pending analysis. I had been sitting on a linguistic goldmine without realizing it. The next 3 weeks became an obsession. I converted the field station into a linguistic laboratory, downloading every piece of audio data I'd collected, running it through James's analysis protocols, building a database of vocalizations organized by frequency, duration, and phonemic structure. Patterns emerged quickly. Certain sound combinations appeared repeatedly in specific contexts, near water sources, at territorial boundaries, during what I'd classified as dawn behavioral periods. Some vocalizations were always solitary. Others always appeared in paired sequences, call and response. They had conversations, but it was the juvenile vocalizations that changed everything. The smaller individual, I designated it November 7th, J, produced sounds in a higher frequency range with less complex structure. Child language, I realized, the simplified phonology of someone still learning, and November 7's responses showed modification, slowed cadence, clearer articulation, repetition of key phonemes. It was teaching. The larger individual was actively instructing the smaller one in language use. I documented everything with scientific precision, maintaining the emotional distance required for legitimate research. But late at night, listening to those recordings through headphones, a parent patiently repeating sounds until the child approximated them correctly, I felt something crack in my careful professional detachment. These weren't specimens. They were people. Different people with their own language and culture and family structures. But people. The ethical implications were staggering. If I published this data, if I proved that an unclassified hominid species possessed human-level language capacity, it would change everything. Legal frameworks, conservation law, the entire relationship between Homo sapiens and whatever these beings represented, and it would make them targets. Every research institution, every government agency, every pharmaceutical company looking for genetic data, they would all want access, want samples, want specimens, want to do to them what we'd done to every other species we'd decided was interesting enough to study. I sat in the field station that night surrounded by data that could make my career or end it, and realized I was facing a choice that had nothing to do with science. Did I prove they existed, or did I protect them from being discovered? The decision to make direct contact wasn't rational. It violated every protocol I'd established, every principle of observational research I'd built my career on. But after 3 weeks of listening to them speak to each other, really speak, with grammar and intent and the patience of a parent teaching a child, remaining an invisible observer felt like cowardice. I needed to know what they were saying. More than that, I needed them to know they'd been heard. I chose a location carefully. Not the heart of Territory 7 North where they clearly felt safest, but a boundary area, a small clearing near the creek where November 7 had left territorial markers multiple times. Neutral ground as much as such a thing could exist. I brought minimal equipment. No cameras. The lens glare had always triggered avoidance behaviors. Just an audio recorder in my pocket, a small LED lantern and something I'd spent 2 days preparing. A wooden board with carved symbols. If they had language, they might have symbolic representation. It was a hypothesis based on the tree markings I'd documented, scratches and breaks that showed too much consistency to be random. Possible proto-writing, or at least meaningful pattern making. I had carved 3 symbols into the board, adapted from the most common tree mark configurations. Then I waited. The vigil began at 2200. I sat on a fallen log at the clearing's edge, the lantern providing just enough light to be visible but not blinding. The audio recorder ran silently, and I did something that felt absurd and necessary. I spoke. "My name is Elena," I said to the darkness. "I've been listening. I don't understand your words yet, but I understand that they are words, that you have language, that you're aware and intelligent, and I've been documenting your lives without permission." I paused, feeling the weight of what I was confessing. "I'm sorry for that, and I need you to know. I won't expose you, but I need to understand. Please." The forest absorbed my words into its vast indifference. I waited. 1 hour. 2. The cold settled into my bones. Doubt crept in with it. This was madness. Anthropomorphizing based on pattern recognition, projecting human qualities onto data that could have simpler explanations. At 0047, the varied thrush called from somewhere to my left. Except varied thrushes don't vocalize at night, and the call was wrong. The same tonal range, but the pattern was off. Too deliberate. Too structured. My hand found the recorder, increasing sensitivity. The call came again, closer, and underneath it, almost subliminal, the sound of something large moving through underbrush with impossible stealth. Then, at the clearing's far edge, a shape materialized from darkness. November 7th. Even knowing the measurements, nothing prepared me for the reality. It stood fully upright, easily 8 feet tall, shoulders broad enough to block the stars behind it. Dark hair covered most of its body, catching the lantern light in shades of burnt umber and copper. And the face, God, the face. The heavy brow ridge, the deep-set eyes that caught and reflected light like an animal's, but the structure underneath. It watched me with an expression I couldn't read but could feel. Assessment, caution, and something else. Curiosity. We stayed like that for a long moment. Then it did something that stopped my breath. It pointed at the board, at the symbols I'd carved, and it spoke. The vocalization was low, resonant, precisely articulated. 3 distinct sound units corresponding to the 3 symbols. Not random, not mimicry. It was reading them back to me. My hands shook as I picked up the board, pointing to the first symbol. This one? The sound again. Clear, consistent with the first pronunciation. Second symbol. And this? Different vocalization. Distinct phonemes. Third symbol. This? Another unique sound pattern. It was confirming, teaching me, the same way it taught November 7J, breaking down complexity, repeating for comprehension. I played back the audio from the recorder, letting it hear its own voice. November 7 tilted its head, listening. Then, slowly, deliberately, it approached the log where I sat and lowered itself to a crouch, putting its eyes level with mine, reducing the size differential. The gesture was so clearly communicative, so intentionally non-threatening, that tears blurred my vision. "Thank you," I whispered. It vocalized something long and complex, the sounds flowing together with grammatical structure I couldn't parse. But the tone was unmistakable. A question. It was asking me something. I held up the recorder, pointing to it, then to November 7th, trying to mime. Can I listen? Can I learn? The creature's eyes, dark, impossibly deep, held mine for 10 seconds that felt like hours. Then it stood, took 3 steps backward, and vocalized one more time. A short phrase, carefully articulated, and vanished into the forest with a silence that shouldn't have been possible for something that large. I sat alone in the clearing until dawn, playing back those recordings, knowing that everything had changed, and nothing could ever be the same. I had made first contact, and now I had to decide what that meant. James called it the most significant linguistic discovery in human history. He said it sitting in my Seattle apartment, surrounded by printouts of spectrograms and phonetic analyses, his coffee growing cold as he worked through the implications. These vocalizations show embedded hierarchical structure, Elena. Recursion. The ability to nest concepts within concepts. That's the hallmark of human language complexity. It's what separates communication from actual language. He looked up, his expression caught between excitement and something darker. If this data is legitimate, if these recordings are what you say they are, they're real, I said quietly. I've had direct contact, intentional communication, symbol recognition, reciprocal exchange. Then we're not talking about wildlife conservation anymore. We're talking about the rights of a sentient species, legal personhood, cultural protection under international law. He set down the papers. We're talking about rewriting human exceptionalism, or we're talking about painting a target on them. The silence stretched. The Fish and Wildlife Service thinks I'm studying migration patterns, I continued. My reports mention unidentified large mammal behaviors, vague enough to justify the research budget, specific enough to avoid scrutiny. If I publish what I actually have, every institution with resources will mobilize, James finished. Academic, governmental, private sector. They'll want specimens, DNA samples, cognitive testing. Your subjects will go from protected unknowns to the most hunted beings on the planet. So what do? He stood, pacing my small apartment like a caged thing. The scientific imperative says we document, we publish, we share knowledge with the global research community. That's the foundation of everything we do, but I have a daughter, he said softly. She's 7, learning to read, to write, to express herself. And when I listen to these recordings, when I hear that adult teaching that juvenile using the same patient repetition I use when Maya asks me to explain a word, I don't hear data. I hear family. He returned to the table, gathering his materials. I can't tell you what to do, Elena, but I can tell you this. Whatever you decide, I'm with you. If you want to go public, I'll co-author and accept the consequences. If you want to bury this, he met my eyes. Then these files never existed, and we never had this conversation. After he left, I spent 3 days reviewing everything. 7 years of data, 47 hours of vocalization recordings, photographic evidence of tool use, symbolic marking, and behavioral complexity that exceeded wild chimpanzees and approached human cultural transmission. I had enough for a career-defining publication, enough to revolutionize primatology, anthropology, linguistics, enough to make my name permanent in scientific history, or I had enough to seal the fate of the last free population of an uncontacted hominid species. The phone call from my supervisor came on the 4th day. Dr. Voss, we need you to come to Portland. Director Holloway wants a briefing on Territory 7 North. He's seen some of your preliminary data and has questions. My stomach dropped. What kind of questions? The kind that come with expanded funding and additional personnel assignments. Congratulations, Elena. Your work is getting noticed. I thanked her with appropriate professional enthusiasm and ended the call with hands that had gone numb. Expanded funding meant more researchers. Additional personnel meant ending my solitary fieldwork. Getting noticed meant scrutiny, oversight, and eventually the exposure I'd spent 7 years carefully avoiding. The service wasn't stupid. Someone had looked at my data closely enough to see the gaps, the incidents I'd reported vaguely, the audio files I'd classified as environmental noise, the patterns I'd documented without drawing obvious conclusions. They knew I was hiding something. They just didn't know what. Yet, I had maybe 2 weeks before the Portland briefing. 2 weeks to decide whether to maintain the lie I'd been living, that Territory 7 North showed interesting but inconclusive behavioral anomalies, or to reveal enough truth to satisfy their curiosity while protecting November 7 and its family, or 2 weeks to do something entirely different. I opened my laptop and started typing. Not a scientific report, not a briefing document, an exit strategy. The plan formed in pieces, assembled from 7 years of understanding how the system worked, and more importantly, how to make it work for me. I returned to the Olympic Peninsula field station and spent 6 days doing something that felt like destruction and salvation in equal measure. I corrupted my own data, not all of it. The earlier years remained pristine, enough to justify the research budget I'd used, enough to demonstrate legitimate scientific inquiry. But the Territory 7 North files from the past 18 months became a carefully constructed maze of technical failures. Audio recordings corrupted by equipment malfunction, motion sensor data compromised by calibration drift, photographic evidence degraded by moisture infiltration, every piece of hard proof that November 7's population possessed language, tool use, and cultural transmission, gone, replaced by fragments, hints, suggestions that could mean anything or nothing. I kept backups, of course, encrypted drives hidden in 3 separate locations, but the official record would show only what I wanted it to show. A dedicated researcher pursuing leads that ultimately went nowhere. But data corruption alone wouldn't be enough. I needed a reason to abandon Territory 7 North entirely, a scientific justification for recommending that the area be removed from active monitoring. I found it in environmental contamination. The logging roads that provided access to the peninsula had been treated with chemical dust suppressants, compounds that, in sufficient concentration, could compromise field equipment and potentially affect local wildlife behavior. It was plausible, documentable, and gave me the excuse I needed. I drafted a report recommending that Territory 7 North be placed on observational hold pending environmental remediation assessment, bureaucratic language for leave it alone for at least 3 years. The science was thin, but I had 7 years of credibility and I was betting that thin science would win over administrative inertia. Before I submitted anything, I returned to the clearing one final time. I brought the symbol board, updated now with 12 marks, combinations I derived from November 7's vocalizations, patterns that seemed to carry meaning, and I brought something else, a field guide to Olympic Peninsula plants, heavily annotated in the margins. If they understood symbols, they might be able to learn written language, and if they could read, they could learn what was coming. I waited 4 hours before November 7 appeared. This time, it brought November 7J. The juvenile was exactly as the data suggested, perhaps 4.5 feet tall, lighter hair, moving with the careful attention of someone learning their environment, and watching me with the same intelligent curiosity as its parent, unafraid, but cautious. I held up the board, pointing to each symbol while vocalizing the sounds November 7 had taught me. Clumsy, probably mispronounced, but attempting communication. November 7 listened, then responded with corrections, slowing certain phonemes, emphasizing tonal shifts I'd missed. Teaching. When I felt confident I wasn't completely destroying their language, I pointed to the book, then to myself, then to November 7th. The gesture. This is how my kind speaks. Writing. I opened to a page showing a Douglas fir, the tree species most common in their territory. I pointed to the image, then to the surrounding forest, trying to create association. Then I pointed to the written word, tree. November 7 leaned closer, studying the page with an intensity that made my breath catch. One massive finger extended, touching the illustration, then the text. It vocalized their word for tree. I recognized it from recordings near the creek bed. Then carefully it touched each letter in sequence, not random, examining structure, pattern, the relationship between symbol and meaning. Yes, I whispered. Written language, symbols that carry sound and meaning. I spent the next hour going through the book, building associations. Water, stone, sky, food, danger, especially danger. On the final page, I had drawn my own symbols, crude sketches showing humans with cameras, with trucks, with capture equipment. And I had written in clear block letters, "They are coming, hide." November 7th studied the page for a long time. Then it looked at me, and I saw understanding in those deep-set eyes. It knew. It had always known that discovery meant danger, that the same curiosity that drove me here drove others who would be less careful, less respectful. The creature vocalized something long and complex to the juvenile, who listened with absolute attention. Teaching, I realized, passing on the warning, making sure the child understood the stakes. Then November 7 did something that broke me. It placed one hand on my shoulder, gentle despite the size, warm through my jacket, and vocalized a phrase I'd heard once before. The same tones, the same structure. James had analyzed that particular sequence. His best translation, understood. Thank you. They left without another sound, melting into forest darkness like they'd never existed. I hiked out the next morning and never returned to Territory 7 North. The Portland briefing went exactly as I'd planned. Director Holloway reviewed my contamination report with the tired skepticism of a man used to research setbacks and budget justifications. The corrupted data files played perfectly, just enough technical detail to seem legitimate, just enough ambiguity to avoid deeper questions. "So your recommendation is to suspend active monitoring in Territory 7 North?" he asked, fingers drumming on the conference table. "For a minimum of 3 years, yes. The environmental contamination compromises data integrity. Any conclusions we draw from current observations would be questionable at best." I maintained perfect professional neutrality. "I'd suggest redirecting resources to Territory 4 West. We've been seeing promising preliminary indicators there." The lie came easily. Territory 4 West showed typical black bear activity and nothing else, but it would keep researchers busy and far from November 7's family. "What about the linguistic analysis?" This from Dr. Patricia Morrison, the service's chief research coordinator. "Your preliminary notes mentioned possible complex vocalizations." My heart rate spiked, but I kept my expression bland. "Equipment malfunction. Unfortunately, the audio that initially appeared structured turned out to be interference from logging equipment operating on similar frequencies. I've included the technical analysis in Appendix C. More lies, built on falsified spectrograms and manufactured interference patterns. James had helped with that part, creating corrupted audio that would satisfy casual review without revealing anything meaningful. Morrison frowned but nodded. Disappointing, but these things happen in field research. They do, I agreed. The meeting concluded with approval for my contamination hold and reassignment to less sensitive territories. I walked out of the federal building with my career intact and my conscience screaming. That night, James met me at the same anonymous coffee shop where this had all begun. It's done, I said. Territory 7 North is off limits for at least 3 years. By then, I'll have moved to a different region and someone else's problem. And the subjects? Warned. As much as I could manage. I stirred my coffee without drinking it. I left them the field guide. Hopefully they'll use it to understand written warnings if anyone posts signs or notices. But there's only so much I can do. You did what most people wouldn't have the courage to do, James said quietly. You chose their survival over your career advancement. I didn't end my career. I just limited it. Same thing in academic terms. You'll never publish the most important research of your life. You'll never get credit for discovering an uncontacted language group. Every talk you give, every paper you write, it will all be diminished by the knowledge of what you're hiding. He was right. I'd sentenced myself to a career of lesser work, of settling for competent but unremarkable research. The price of protection. There's something else, James continued. I've been approached by a private research foundation. Well-funded, interested in cryptolinguistic work. They've heard rumors about the Olympic data and want to know if I'd be willing to consult. My blood went cold. What did you tell them? That the Olympic project was a dead end. Equipment failures, environmental contamination, no viable data. He met my eyes. I can lie as well as you can, Elena, but you need to know. The interest is there. People are asking questions. Your data corruption was good but not perfect. Someone with enough resources and motivation could reconstruct what you actually found. How long do I have? Hard to say. Months, maybe a year. But eventually, someone's going to go back there. And if they're less ethical than you, he didn't need to finish. I spent the next 3 weeks quietly sabotaging every remaining data trail. Field notes accidentally deleted. Equipment logs corrupted. Photographic evidence degraded beyond recovery. Every piece of proof that Territory 7 North held anything significant, erased. It felt like burning books, like destroying knowledge, like betraying everything I'd been trained to value. But when I lay awake at night, I didn't hear November 7's vocalizations or see November 7J's careful observations. I heard that patient teaching voice, parent to child, passing on language and culture and survival skills. And I knew I'd made the right choice. Some knowledge is too dangerous to exist. The letter arrived 6 months after the Portland briefing. Standard Fish and Wildlife Service envelope. My Seattle address typed with bureaucratic precision. I opened it expecting routine correspondence, assignment updates, budget notifications, the usual administrative noise. Instead, I found a single page. No official letterhead. Just typed text. Dr. Voss, we know what you found. We know what you're protecting. And we know why you destroyed the data. We're not your enemies. If you want to help them survive, contact us. A phone number followed. Nothing else. My hand shook as I read it 3 times, looking for threat or manipulation. But the tone was careful, almost respectful. We're not your enemies. I burned the letter that night, watching the paper curl and blacken in my apartment's fireplace. But I memorized the number. 2 weeks later, I called it. The voice that answered was female, older, carrying the kind of authority that comes from decades of careful work. Dr. Voss, thank you for calling. My name is Catherine Ward. I work with a conservation network that operates outside official channels. Who are you? People who've been doing what you've been doing, protecting uncontacted species from human discovery. We have resources, legal frameworks, and most importantly, experience in making things disappear. A pause. Territory 7 North isn't the only location, Dr. Voss. There are others, and they all need advocates willing to choose preservation over publication. Why should I trust you? Because 7 years ago, you made a choice to document carefully instead of expose recklessly. Because 6 months ago, you destroyed your own career rather than compromise their safety. Because you taught them to read so they could see warnings. Her voice softened. We've been watching you, Dr. Voss. You've passed tests you didn't know you were taking. What do you want from me? We want you to keep doing exactly what you've been doing. Monitor, protect, and when discovery becomes inevitable, because it always does, eventually, we want you to help us manage the exposure in ways that prioritize survival over spectacle. How many are there? Locations, I mean. 17 that we're actively protecting. 23 possibles awaiting confirmation. And probably dozens more that nobody's found yet. She let that sink in. Your Olympic subjects aren't alone, Dr. Voss, but they're all vulnerable. Every single one. I sat in my apartment, phone pressed to my ear, feeling the weight of a choice that would define the rest of my life. What happens if I say no? Nothing. You continue your career, we continue our work, and you live knowing that you could have done more, but chose not to. No judgment in her voice, just fact. But I don't think that's who you are. She was right. If I do this, if I join your network, what changes? Everything and nothing. You keep your day job, maintain your cover. But when you find evidence of uncontacted populations, it comes to us first. We assess, we protect, we build legal and environmental barriers. And if exposure becomes inevitable, we control the narrative. That sounds like playing God. It sounds like being responsible for the consequences of human curiosity, Catherine corrected. We didn't ask to be in this position, but someone has to stand between discovery and exploitation. Someone has to be willing to lie to protect truth. I thought about November 7, teaching its child, about those careful vocalizations, that patient repetition, about intelligence and awareness, and the right to exist without becoming specimens. I'm in, I said. Tell me what you need me to do. Catherine's voice carried something that might have been relief. Welcome to the network, Dr. Voss. First rule, trust no one outside this call until we tell you otherwise. Second rule, your research continues exactly as before, but your findings come to us encrypted. Third rule, if you're ever compromised, you burn everything and disappear. We'll handle the rest. Understood. Good. Someone will contact you with secure communication protocols within 72 hours. Until then, maintain normal routines, and Dr. Voss? She paused. Thank you for choosing them over yourself. Not everyone does. The line went dead. I sat in silence, understanding that I'd just crossed a threshold I could never recross. I was no longer a government wildlife analyst. I was something else. A guardian, a gatekeeper, a keeper of secrets that could reshape humanity's understanding of itself. 3 days later, a package arrived. Inside, an encrypted phone, detailed communication protocols, and a list of 17 locations where uncontacted hominid populations had been confirmed. Territory 7 North was just the beginning. I never saw November 7 again. The Olympic Peninsula passed into my past like a dream half remembered, vivid in fragments fading in specifics. But the recordings remain, encrypted and hidden, proof of what I found and chose to protect. The network Catherine Ward introduced me to is larger than I imagined. Researchers across 3 continents, all maintaining the same careful charade, documenting just enough to justify their presence, hiding everything that matters. We operate in silence, communicating through channels that leave no trace, protecting populations that most of humanity still believes are myths. I've been to 4 additional sites since that night in Seattle, each one different terrain, different behavioral patterns, different solutions to the problem of remaining invisible in an increasingly monitored world, but each one the same in the ways that matter: intelligence, culture, family structures, and the capacity for language. They speak, all of them, not the same languages. There's dialectical variation, regional differences, even what appears to be separate linguistic families. But they all possess structured communication sophisticated enough to pass information across generations, to teach and learn and preserve knowledge. They are people, just people who chose a different path than Homo sapiens, who survived in the margins while we claimed the center, and they're dying out, not from disease or predation, but from the slow constriction of habitat, the encroachment of development, the weight of human expansion into every remaining wild space. Each population is isolated, small, genetically vulnerable. Without intervention, most will be extinct within 3 generations. But if we reveal them to save them, we destroy them just as surely. That's the impossible equation I live with now. The knowledge that protection requires invisibility, but invisibility ensures slow decline. There's no solution, just choices that trade one kind of loss for another. Sometimes I wonder what November 7 would say if I could speak its language fluently, if I could explain the choice I made, the career I limited, the knowledge I buried to keep it safe. Would it understand? Would it be grateful or resentful that I considered it mine to protect it all? I'll never know. But on quiet nights, when the weight of secrets becomes too heavy, I pull out those encrypted files and listen to vocalizations I can now partially parse, to conversations between parent and child, to a language that persists in the spaces humans haven't yet claimed. And I hear not just sounds but meaning, not just communication but consciousness. The world doesn't know what it's losing. The forests of the Pacific Northwest, the mountains of Central Asia, the cloud forests of Central America, all holding communities that think and feel and speak in languages that will die unrecorded, leaving no trace except in the memories of people like me, people who chose silence over acclaim. I work now as a regional conservation coordinator, a position deliberately vague enough to explain my frequent travel to remote locations. The pay is modest. The recognition is non-existent. I'll never publish the work that matters most, but I sleep at night knowing that 17 populations still exist in relative safety because people like Catherine Ward and James Okonkwo and me chose protection over publication. That somewhere in the Olympic Peninsula, if luck and caution hold, November 7 and November 7J still move through Douglas fir forests, speaking in a language only they understand, surviving in the silence we've fought to preserve. The greatest discovery of my career is one I'll never share, and that's exactly how it should be.